Hello, this is Dr. Mike, and I wanted to just add a few comments to week two's studies. And we're talking about the golden age of industry in the United States in the post Civil War era. One of the things that became quite apparent after the second half of the century was that capitalism was not completely the most stable system that they could probably have had. And that was because about every 7 to 10 years, there would be an economic downturn. It happened in 1873 with the panic after the war, 1887, 1893. 1893 is a very interesting study because the likelihood, I think, of it being a bigger depression than the one that was coming in 1930. You have to keep in mind that 1930 was as large as it was mainly because of the advent of radio. Radio became a staple in the 1920s. It was actually invented as a ship to shore means of communication. For the military, nobody ever dreamed it'd be used for music and for news and all the things that it did, but it did become quite popular. But in 1893, most people were still living in a farm economy and they were not in cities and did not get newspapers, which was the major means of knowing what was going on in the world. And so I think 1893, if it were larger than 1930, it was mainly because of just the lack of information that people did not have as far as their functioning in the world and knowing what was going on. But at any rate, 1893 was a rather large depression type economic downturn. 1907, 1911, 1920s, and 20s were the recovery, of course, from the war, the 1930 and so on. So basically, capitalism is going to be every 7 to 10, 15 years, something of that nature, going to be kind of an economic downturn. But from the Civil War, as people began to get back on their feet, then industry in the North especially began to rebuild. There was an overabundance of trains. They had overbuilt the railroad, that was North and South, but especially in the North to move troops and armaments and different things for the war. And so there was a disruption, a bankruptcy of several large train companies, and were being bought up by people like the Vanderbilts or Morgans and those kind of people that became super rich during this era because they were going to be bringing the back online most of the industry that had been changed and used for war munitions and things of that nature for the 4 years of the war. By the same token, the South is not making much progress. As we said, I think last time, the Reconstruction was forced to end because they needed to get Rutherford B. Hayes confirmed as president. And that was a part of the bargain that was made that the South would allow him to be president if they would remove the troops and go home. And so they did. But the South basically stayed in a farm economy, kept kind of piddling around with cotton. Cotton in the 4 years during the war had moved on. It had moved to California. It eventually is going to move overseas. Even today, if you ask the question where most of the cotton in the world is being created, you would think about Egypt. You think about your cotton sheets from Egypt, Pakistan, India. Any place that's hot and dry will grow cotton. So most of the world's cotton moved on, and it moved from short staple cotton, which was the thing in the South, to a long staple cotton, which produced more cotton per plant. And so it never really came back to the South again because when they had free labor with slavery, it was much more viable. After the war, you've got to realize that that free labor is now gone. Many families are going to have larger families, numbers of children, mainly to work the farms. And don't get the wrong impression about slavery in the South. Not every family, most families did not own slaves. Most families were sharecroppers or small farms, and they were not big plantations where slavery was a major player. We kind of get that sense in sometimes in our readings and things, but that's not really true. There were lots of small farmers that were not a part of slavery, and then there was a lot of large plantations that were thousands and thousands of acres of cotton mostly. South Carolina, my home state, I think I told you, not only had cotton, but we had rice before the Revolution. Rice was the number one crop in South Carolina. Rice is what made South Carolina the richest province before the Revolution. And of course, it went, and it was also the center of slavery. Slavery started in South Carolina, bringing slaves in from the Bahamas into the Carolinas. And so South Carolina, very early on, would be majority black. And even through the Civil War, it would still have the majority of African Americans in the state and fewer whites. So it was always kind of one of those states that, between it and Alabama that wrestle for the lowest spot on the totem pole. Even today, South Carolina is like number 48, 49 in education. And so those things have lingered all through these years. But the golden age of industry in the United States has a lot of characters, had a lot of events that are worth noting from great names like Rockefeller, Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, in the progressive movement, where they finally began to make a move towards giving people workers' rights. I mean, in the 1800s, a 9-year-old or an 8-year-old could work in a factory in the dangerous conditions that entailed. And so there were no working rights. And so basically that will change in the early 1900s. But in the 1800s, everybody worked, and most people worked barefooted. There were not a great deal of shoes to be had. So they were living pretty rough lives. And we had millions and millions of people that were immigrants coming into the country from every country in the world, coming through Ellis Island on the East Coast and some on the West Coast, but mainly Ellis Island. And they practiced what was called chain migration. They wanted to live around people that spoke their language, people that ate their food, people that went to their kind of religious organization. And so you will have places, and they end up in places like New York City or Philadelphia or Washington, D.C. or Chicago, because there was no need for transportation. The factories that they were going to work in were in the inner city. If you go through some of these bigger cities now, you would still see remnants of the old mills and construction sites in the cities. Many of them have been turned into apartment complexes now. I know that's true in Greenville. Greenville, at one time, my home city, was the textile capital of the world. So we had tons and tons of cotton mills. Most of those have been converted now to apartments and things of that nature. But Greenville is now, believe it or not, after all these years, the number one city to visit in the country. The downtown's just become a fabulous place. But all of these wealthy people like the Vanderbilts, some of you may have visited the Biltmore House in Asheville, North Carolina. And I'll tell you the story behind that, which is really interesting. The Vanderbilts had a mansion in New York City that covered one entire city block, 3 stories high, had 300 maids and people working there. Everybody that lived in New York wanted to get out of New York for the summer months because it was so hot and miserable. So basically, the wealthy would leave town May 1st and come back after September the 1st. The Vanderbilts and others loved vacationing in the Keys in Florida, and so it was just hard to get there. Interesting story. My grandfather was a caretaker for cabins in the mountains that were owned by these wealthy, mainly Jewish store owners in Miami. And they would send him a letter and say, "We're going to be at our cabin the 15th of May, have everything ready." He'd have it ready for them. They would drive up in an A model, which would take 2 weeks to drive. And they would come stay the summer, stay till the after September 1st, and then they would drive back home and go back to work. And they owned the business, so somebody else, of course, worked for them while they were away. So basically, that's how vacationing was done. Remember, there are no roads. You have very poor roads until the 1950s when Eisenhower puts in the interstate highway system. So these wealthy train magnates built a train from New York City all the way down the East Coast through South Carolina, all the way to the Keys in Florida, so that they could go there and enjoy the summer and get back home. Train travel in the 1800s was dirty business. I mean, you got covered in soot and everything else. And so you had to take breaks along the way. And so the Vanderbilts ended up building two mansions, one in Virginia, one in North Carolina, and they would stop over, change clothes, rest a couple of days, and go on. If you've ever seen the Biltmore House in North Carolina, it's like a 32 bedrooms and 32 bathrooms, and they were ashamed of it because it was so small. So they would not invite their friends to visit there because the house was too small. Beautiful place, absolutely stunning place to visit. And I highly recommend that you do that if you get the chance. But these other people like Piers Morgan and Carnegie, all these people, these great barons. Carnegie immigrated to the United States and became a guy who carried telegrams, and he would read those telegrams, and he got business insights and became probably the richest man of the day in steel. And steel would become a major part of the new building of this golden age of industry, because prior to steel, you could not build a building more than 3 stories high. You built bridges, had to be built out of wood, but they could not hold up the weight of, say, a train crossing the Mississippi. And so the first train trestle across the Mississippi was built by Carnegie and his steel. And it was interesting because people were afraid to cross it in a train, afraid the train would collapse. And so, interestingly enough, they used elephants. Elephants have this innate sense of fear, of danger when they're walking on a bridge, and they will not cross a bridge if they sense it's too weak for them. And so these elephants walked out and back over this steel bridge forever, convincing people it was safe. And of course, that opened up the entire West to settlement and to growth and all those things after the Civil War. It really took off. A lot of people moved west to get away from the Reconstruction in the South. Some few African Americans moved to Kansas only to find it was worse than where they came from. So basically, there's a lot of myths and events and people that built the modern United States by looking, we'll look at the free market economies. And, this is America was still a young country then. We're still a young country. We're 250 to 300 years old, somewhere in there, but we're still a very young country and a very naive in a lot of ways. And we're still not sure, especially lately, whether it's going to actually survive or not. So as you read your materials this week, you're going to look at business leaders and think about how they conducted their business, how different it was. One of the things was they did not believe in helping the government, helping a person if they were in trouble. There was no Social Security. There was no reaching out for during times of downturn. There was no reaching out by the government to help businesses recover. They basically just sat and waited for the trough to come back up. And that's what they were doing with the Great Depression of 1930, only it never came back. And so it was complete disaster. So you're going to look at a lot about free market economies and things of that nature, and the progressive movement and what things it brought to the United States, and how that was felt in modern America. And I think you'll find there were only really 3 progressive presidents: Teddy Roosevelt, Grover Cleveland, and Woodrow Wilson. They were 1 Republican, 2 Democrats, but they were all considered to be progressives, or trying to move America forward to a better living than they had. 1893 was a bumper year because they had a World's Fair in Chicago, and they tried to show off all the things we had accomplished there. And they had a world symposium on religion and invite all the religions of the world there so they could show them how Christianity had fought and clawed its way to the top of the heap and had become the most enlightened religion on the planet, only to have within 20 years World War I breakout, and so many millions of people killed, and these were Christians fighting Christians mainly. So it's always quite interesting to see how that is perceived and thought about. War is reprehensible. There's never a good reason for war. And so it's always interesting to see the Christian attitude toward war is also something worth our talking about. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions about any of these things, please let me know. Or if you have a comment that you want to make or some other assertion you want to add to the conversation, I'm always open to talking to students and answering questions. And we can have a class meeting if you want, if that would be beneficial to you. Be sure this week you look carefully at your writings and your readings and do your very best to do well. Check and use the feedback. I spend a lot of time supplying you with feedback because I want you to write better. This is a general education class. That means that you learn more here than just history. You learn writing. Sometimes there's math to be done, whatever. This is a general education. It contributes to your general knowledge. And so I want to see you do exceptionally well. Thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you next week. Thank you.